English spelling sucks, but we can fix it. 380 million is the number of first-language English speakers around the world. These are people who grew up surrounded by English. 750 million is the number of English speakers who grew up in a student environment learning English, but at home spoke a different language. And then 650 million is the number of English speakers who studied English as a foreign language. Keep those figures in mind, because now we're having an impromptu spelling bee. First off, I want you to focus on the word accommodate, specifically after ACC. What letters follow in your mind? Did you get that spelling? Most people get OMMO wrong. The word separate, what's the second vowel? Was it an E or an A? And then finally, the word recommend. It's tricky, because whereas accommodate has 2 C's, this one has 1. And it gets worse when you consider spelling through hearing. The word fish, spelled F-I-S-H, obviously. Or is it? Because if you take the GH from rough, the O from women, and the TI from ration, then yes, f-ish, that pronounces fish. How did it get this bad? Well, in English's defense, it used to be good at spelling words how they were pronounced. Keyword there is used to be because most English spellings are representative of how words were pronounced in Middle English, which is the period between 1066 and the 15th century, 1066 being the Norman invasion of England. And unfortunately, with the invention of the printing press, spelling was standardized. The invention of the printing press was in 1440. So when pronunciation started to differ around the 15th to 18th century, especially with the great vowel shift in which all the long vowels in English, think O-O, E-E, O-U, changed their pronunciation. This has left us with situations in the spelling department, such as the sound E being spelled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's speed things up, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 different ways, and the letter combination O-U-G-H being pronounced though, tough, through, thought, cough, drought, and if you're British, another, borough. The question is no longer, should we have an English reform? It is, what will an English spelling reform need to account for? Well, first of all, let's get our priorities straight. Readers' comfort over writers. That is to say, many to one, not one to many. A language that does this very well is French. All these words, 10 different spellings, all pronounced ton. And yet, all of them are perfectly regular and completely unambiguous. Next, silent letters, but specifically irregular silent letters. These words trip only English speakers in their spelling and do not serve to help with pronunciation. And then finally, like Ireland's Aristotle, finally we have the existing rules and English reader sensibilities. Because we cannot simply respell was as W-U-Z. It's ridiculous. No one will be able to read their own language, and that's a feeling no one should have to endure. However, there are, always have been, and always will be, universal arguments against spelling reform. There are 2 main arguments. One of them is that reform necessarily leads to dialectical favoritism. Take the word B-A-T-H. Do you pronounce that bath or bath? Whichever is chosen to transcribe, the other people will feel left out. And then the next, some words are distinguished only through spelling in English. Take the words T-O-W, T-O-E. In most dialects, they're pronounced exactly the same. If you merge the spelling, how will we tell them apart? And even worse, in some regional dialects of England and Wales, the pronunciation difference is still upheld. If we merge their spellings, they'd be pronouncing something that does not exist in spelling anymore. How would they feel? Now I came prepared with arguments because these arguments themselves are foundless. First of all, it'll create language standardization and contrast loss. Yes, in theory it's a good idea. In practice, English already has correct pronunciations. Take the received pronunciation of England and Wales or the general American of the USA. We'd only be making it so that the orthography fits what is already considered a correct pronunciation. Next, The vast majority of dialects in English are allophonically variant. That is to say, if we take the word bath, pronounced bath or bath, they obey a rule. You do not take the word wrth and suddenly switch around wrath and then wrath. And then finally, for the few words that aren't allophonically variant, well, we already have a foundation, our modern English orthography. So, if we take the word era, we just choose, which can be pronounced era or era, we just choose whichever is closer to the historical pronunciation, and thus the modern spelling. So, if we take era and put an umlaut on the end, that denotes the schwa, era. And that could be the official spelling, because it is closer than the variant. The variant could be e macron ra umlaut, which would be pronouncing era, the other dialectical pronunciation. This would lead to a situation in which the official spelling could be era umlaut, and then the de facto or colloquial spelling could be e macron ra umlaut. And this would create two variants, but more importantly, expression. When somebody can express themselves better by expressing what their dialect is, they have more options available to them in how they want to communicate their English. And the next, we lose spelling distinctions, is even less founded, because the fact of the matter is, English has more rules than you think, believe it or not. If we go back to TOE and TOW, we won't need to change their spellings. We can keep them the same, because OE follows a rule, and so does OW, and that rule is, more often than not, these letter combinations are pronounced O. We need to change the exception, not the rule. Change DOES, perhaps to DUS, HOW to HOU. And then, rarely merging words, when it does happen, does not necessarily degrade English. Let's take SHOE, which is now going to have to be spelled the same as HAOO, which is the verb as opposed to the noun. How often will you get those mixed up? Be honest with yourself. And if you really do think that this is a detriment, then you have no need to worry at all, because English has more than over 100 common heteronyms. These are words that are spelt the same, but pronounced differently with different meanings. If we take the word separate, it has, yes, the adjective separate, but the verb separate, which in modern English orthography are spelt the same despite having two completely different meanings. Why? Why are these spelt the same? We need to disambiguate. We need reform. Because whether you like it or not, the fact of the matter is that English is the universal language, being the official language in 59 countries, of which only 18 are Anglospheric. That is to say, in only 18 of these countries were people born surrounded by native English speakers. This has led to a situation in which there are 3 times more second language English speakers than first language. We have a duty to these people, more than just to ourselves, to make English the best language it can be. Why? Because typos are important in our modern day life, where it can lose you a job or make you ridiculed online. And who's most likely to make typos? The people who grew up with the language or those who studied it? The fact of the matter is that we cannot uphold racism in our globalizing world, subconscious or not, because that is exactly what it is. Whereas in history in Turkey with its Arabic complicated script, or in Korea with its Hanja, which is overly complicated, both of which had reform in order to make it better and more accessible to the lower classes, now we are not only practicing classism in upholding this exclusive complicated script, we are upholding racism. But the most tragic matter of all of this is that we don't need to change the way we write or read, not that much. Not enough to make a big difference. Here is a sample text written entirely in the proposed orthographical reform, and please pay attention. In green, the words that did not need to change at all. In blue, the words that only needed diacritics in order to be regular. And in yellow, the words that differed in one letter, whether that was added, subtracted, or changed, all in order to make it perfectly regular, completely unambiguous, and completely perfect in pronunciation. Now, if you haven't already started reading this, allow me. This text may be hard to read, but it's completely regular. With complete knowledge of its many rules but zero exceptions, there is only one way a word could theoretically be pronounced for every word. It definitely looks like someone's had a bit too much fun with diacritics and chopped off letters everywhere, and unfortunately, as long as there isn't a proper regulatory body for the English language, it'll stay that way. But it shows the potential that exists in English to reform and create a language a bit more deserving of being the universal language. Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, if this proves anything, it's that there is no excuse for upholding an outdated orthography in our era of globality. Thank you.